righty. Good morning. Thank you for joining me. I'm Brigantia Blackbird, a Blackbird's Brew. I hope you have your tea, your coffee, whatever it is that gives you a lift of a morning with you. And if you're able to join me during this live, thank you very much. It's Monday. We've got a lot going on. I'm sure everyone's trying to get a good start to the week. And if you're watching later on, thank you for making time for me. Always appreciated. And as always, please smash the like button, share this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. And if you are able to watch in the live, I am looking for any comments that you might have. So if you want to have more of a back and forth discussion, we can 100% do that. So I think that always makes for a better show. But as the title suggests, quite the kettle of fish. Now, when I got up this morning at a rather ungodly hour, I stepped outside, I breathed in the air, and it was just that nice, fresh spring air. And I thought, this is fantastic. And then I got my tea and I sat down and I was checking what was going on in the world. And I got a message on Gab. It was a reply to a comment that I had made on a post that Andrew Torba had made. I don't know when. Apparently, the original post is no longer up. So I would reference that for you if you could. I mean, if it was Andrew Torba, he's the head honcho on Gab, I guess, and he's forever going on about Christian nationalism and building a Christian nation and Christian this and Christian that, and he has a very, very, very narrow worldview, even by monotheistic standards. And every so often, if I see him making one of his posts on Gab, and I happen to be on there at the time, I might say something, give him a little pushback, because he's always going on about how Christianity needs to be the focus, and it's the only answer for our problems. And I always give him that pushback, saying, no, we need constitutional restoration. And part of that Constitution is about not making people's choices for them about religion. The government has no right to make an establishment of a religion. And quite frankly, what we believe in, that is absolutely a matter of individual conscience. Even if you browbeat people into giving public lip service to what you believe, you haven't actually persuaded them. And I've reminded him of that on several occasions. But the comment that I made that actually gave, rise to the reply I got this morning was this. Let's see, make that a bit bigger for you. My reply to whatever nonsense Andrew Torba was saying is that what's needed is an American infrastructure to combat the Marxists. If you get the Christian nation you hope for, you'll find out how quickly go for each other's throats. Learn your own history. Religion cannot dictate on the legal level. You never learned the right lesson about this. I am so ashamed of you for failing and for using your reach of influence to promote a system that will result in greater human suffering. Never forget, the bloodiest of religious wars have been different sects of the same overall religion. And how true that has been throughout all of history, especially when we look at the medieval, the Renaissance period, and whenever you started seeing people breaking away from what is now the Catholic Church, because before it was just the church. And then Martin Luther got a bee in his bonnet, got a little cranky, posted a few queries on the chapel door. And the next thing you know, you've got all of these different Christian sects who have different ideas and philosophies about Reformation and what needs to happen and why, and what's biblical, what isn't, who's actually practicing Christianity, who isn't. I mean, and it turned into this mess, and it got extremely violent. The nastiest periods of the Inquisition. I mean, this was all this was in consequence of other people finding other Christians insufficiently Christian, and so they ended up burning them at the stake. But make no mistake, Christian on Christian violence is a very, very real historical thing. And the only thing that's really brought it to an end was adopting this more of a live and let live of you are not the owner of your neighbor's conscience, which is an idea that essentially has its roots in paganism. And it is not something that comes from a biblical worldview, because if, as so many of us who are pagan now, we did come from Christian backgrounds, you'll probably recall that scripture that's get quoted over and over again about Jesus saying, I am the way and the truth and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me, etc., and so on and so forth. And this is something that you get with monotheistic, our way is the only way kind of religions. They do not lend themselves to theological interpretation. And so there's a certain amount of, well, what do you do when you've got heretics and apostates and people with whom you otherwise disagree? What do you do with these troublemakers? Well, in previous ages of history, the answer was that you tortured them, you killed them, you tried to frighten people into submission, or you just simply removed them from society. So it's a thing. It's a real thing, and people who are Christians who are not aware of their own history, educate yourself now, because those of us who are pagan, we already did those investigations, and that's one of many things that we didn't like what we see. So there's reason why we're a little gun shy about trusting you in the here and now. But here's the reply I got to my original comment. It comes from someone called Reduxer. He didn't have much of a profile, so, I'm not doxing him, and this is all public anyway. But he said, let's not be hasty now. Christianity only begins cannibalizing itself once it no longer has non-Christian rivals to unite against. The only question's which ones they'll target first. And Christian zealots, I have no doubt, would much prefer a world of warring Christian sects than one of warring religions. It's not a perfect world, but it's a step closer to heaven. A step closer to heaven. This absolutely proves the point I was making in last Wednesday's video. It was Pagans Are Patriotic, and I was talking about this need to actually come together on constitutional grounds rather than trying to divide it up religiously. And hello, Paddy's partner. Thank you very much for joining me. For being here. Leave you a nice note in the comments. Oh, so glad to be here. I was talking to myself. This is much more comfortable now. But yes, in that video on Wednesday, I talked about the absolute danger of trying to substitute religious theology for a workable civil society in which people of different beliefs and different backgrounds and all of that are able to coexist and, in relative peace. No one's going to agree. Nothing's going to be good all the time, but it's a livable system. We can be next door neighbors without feeling the need to burn each other's houses down. I think that's a preferable state of affairs. But this person appears to be fine with that. And I would imagine it doesn't really matter if the different religion is, Judaism or Islam or Hinduism, Buddhism, let alone paganism. He's just not concerned. It's just it would be better to have, Christians who are at odds with each other than to have a world in which, you have multiple religions. I mean, that's what I'm getting from that comment. I mean, let me know if you're getting something different from his thoughts there, but that's certainly the impression I got. So my response to him, as you can see, was closer to heaven, killing off all the people who disagree with you. I'll take solid, practical pagan morality over the posturing of monotheism any day, and to that I hold. Now, I did a little bit of investigation on this ne'er-do-well. I looked at his profile on Gab. Interestingly, I'm not going to pull it up on the screen, but I have it over here on my own tab. He says that under the About, back again, mainly for learning about paganism and related topics. Now, that's quite a shift from the attitude we see in his comment to me. Then when I look at his profile, I don't see anything about paganism. What I do see is a very peculiar thing that he reposted about navigating relationships in 2023, plus blocking the government from your marriage and to avoid divorce. And among the other suggestions, it's don't marry this woman, don't live with your potential wife until you're 55 to 60, then live together permanently. When you're ready to make her your wife, plan and do a wedding ceremony to her satisfaction. If you're not religious, invite your best friend to officiate, or invite a rabbi or priest if you are religious. Again, we're not looking at someone who seems to have a pagan worldview. Don't register with the state, no papers, blah, blah, blah. Just gift her and her dad a memorable golden plaque to memorialize the occasion. Start making babies when you're ready. Don't live with her at your matrimonial home for more than 7 months every year. Have your own separate house where you live and where you go to business and work. Stay in touch via phone. Do this until you're 55 or 60, then live together permanently. And, by the way, thank him for that. That's something that this fool reposted. I mean, can you imagine? And Patty, wish I could stay driving in and out of cell service. Drive safe, and thank you for stopping in and listening when you can. But can you imagine? So we have someone who, on his about, claims to be interested in learning about paganism, promotes a Christian worldview to me on in response to my comments, and is talking about conducting marital affairs in a manner that is neither consistent with Christianity or paganism, or quite frankly, anyone who has good sense. I mean, don't live with your wife for more than 7 months every year. Have your own separate house. Have your own separate house. These must be wealthy people. Can you imagine who can afford to run 2 households? But then apart from that, he has a few bitch posts about funding various things. He's trying to impugn CPAC, saying it's run by leftist money. And then he has a few things about racial issues, which were, pretty repugnant, if we're being honest. I, I mean, I'm not sure what this person is into, but I think it's safe to say that he's not what he appears to be. There's something odd going on there. Patty, yeah, sure. The best way to honor my wife and best friend is to never see her. I know, right? I mean, I've always thought that made for a good, good relationship. The secret to our marriage's success is our lack of communication. I don't know about other women, but if my husband said, I'm only going to live with you no more than 7 months out of the year, and I'll just kind of contact you by phone every now and again, but otherwise I'll have a different residence. Oh, by the way, make sure you stay faithful to me and all that other junk. Yeah, I don't think that's going to work. I don't think that's going to be a workable dynamic. I mean, this is someone who's got a very, very skewed worldview. But this is what happens. People are absolutely out of their minds. We're having a societal level um, existential crisis, and people are questioning everything and trying to revamp everything. They're trying to protect themselves from the government, which is a legitimate concern. But they're also, you can tell by people who make these kinds of marriage suggestions, they don't actually believe in marriage, and they don't actually believe in getting to know someone enough and building enough of a relationship of trust on solid grounds to where it would make that kind of paranoia unnecessary. I mean, my husband and I have talked many times because we're mature people. We know that things happen, and if it, for whatever reason, if our marriage came to an end, there are just certain no-go lines that we agreed even long before we even talked about marriage that we just wouldn't do. I would not go after his family farm. He would not do certain things to me, because you don't do that to someone. I mean, there are relationships that don't work out, but that doesn't mean that you go out to ruin someone's life, their reputation, go after their bank account, all this other stuff. You can, even when things go wrong, that's what I'm saying. You can, if you are a good person, you can conduct the dissolution of a relationship in a manner that is, well, not sordid and tacky and just about, revenge and all this other petty bullshit that people bring into it. I mean, people have no sense of dignity. And of course, I mean, I think it's fair to say that, feminism has done a great deal to really destroy relations between men and women. There's good reasons why there is distrust on a broad level. But when we're talking about marriage, we're talking about an individual level. So between his views on that, his racial views, and his religious oddities, I mean, that just wasn't something I was really wanting to see with my first cup of tea this morning. I found that rather irritating. Oh, but on to the next thing. The tangle of terminology, as I called it in the description box, it's really been getting under my skin. People throwing out terms like white, black, brown, especially when we're talking about American society. This kind of reducing people to Crayola box, basic kindergarten box of colors, as if that's supposed to mean something. That really, really gets on my nerves. And I find it just grossly disrespectful. I mean, there's, whether you're talking about a white person or a black person or a brown person, that tells you absolutely nothing about their ethnicity, their background, who their ancestors were, or what region of the world their family came from before coming here. It tells you nothing. In the case of Europe, I mean, how many different countries has that been, just currently now, let alone, pre-World War and, other, political shiftings on the European continent? How many different countries are there in Asia? How many different nations and tribes of people are in places like Africa and Australia, North and Central South America? My point is that when you just reduce people to color, I feel like that is actually erasing their ethnic identity. Because it doesn't mean anything. It really, really doesn't. Now, if, just using my own ethnic background as an example, I have, a lot of English in me, Anglo-Saxon. I have some Celtic in me, primarily, say, Wales, possibly some Irish here and there. I have some French blood. And from what we can tell, a lot of that originated from Normandy. So that also brings in some of the Scandinavian DNA because, of course, Rollo became a Duke of Normandy. And then, of course, on my mother's side, more English, but also a very Germanic background and then a Prussian background. So there's a lot going on there. That's a lot of variety. Are you seriously telling me that all of these tribes of people are just the same? Because I'm pretty sure they wouldn't have thought so. You were talking about different groups of people who at different points in European history were actively at war with one another and sometimes still are. Just because the French and the English aren't currently firing cannonballs at each other, it doesn't mean that, it's a state of peace and mutual trust and respect. It just means they're not currently shooting each other. Given the right circumstances, I'm sure that could flare up all over again, because they're different cultures. They are different peoples. They have different ways of doing things. And newsflash to everyone, most people like their own ways of doing things and aren't interested in adapting their lives to suit someone else. I know that's an astonishing thing in American society because we are a little bit more mutable. We are a little bit more open to outside influences because we are the melting pot. What's really gotten in our way is that people are no longer melting. They just want to be these jagged edges and, completely distinct and no commonality at all. And, you can see what that's really done for our society. I don't think that's really working out for anyone. Just my opinion. And another thing that I think does get in our way is that we never seem to get it right. Either people are completely abandoning all of their cultural roots, when they come to America, whether this was many hundreds of years ago or 5 minutes ago. Either it's complete abandonment, which, that's not really the point. There are things you can bring and contribute to American society, and that's great. It doesn't mean you're trying to overthrow the Constitution. But then you have the other extreme of people who are here because they want to essentially colonize us, turn us into them, turn our society into what they're accustomed to, even if they were fleeing from it, or they are wanting to essentially dictate terms. We just never seem to get it right. And I think partially that's because we're a young country, and partially because we have been so infected with Marxist thinking that it has rendered it all but impossible to actually navigate these things. And I'm furious about that. And I'm also really, really bored with it because, one of the ways to make all of the Marxism disappear is by stop living life on their terms, stop having conversations, stop making so many caveats in conversation. That's one way that we could start to untangle the terminology, because they're going to speak their own language anyway, the Marxists, that is. So why should we give up our own? At a certain point, I don't think we need to translate for them anymore. I think they need to start translating us. If you conduct yourself from a position of strength, you're more likely to have strength. But whenever you're trying to meet someone halfway and compromise and all this and that, they will continue to take advantage of you. Just saying. And this brings us to the other issue of terminology that's been getting under my skin. Every so often, I'll see this come up. Different pagan content creators will bring up the subject, and they'll be making a fuss over, who is allowed to call themselves Norse pagan or Celtic pagan or whatever other kind of pagan, saying, if you aren't sure that you have direct ancestry from that, you can't call yourself that. And in fact, even if you do, if you've never lived in those countries, you can't call yourself that. And I thought, well, no one died and put you in charge. To those who make that argument, I just want to make that clear. You're not in charge of anything besides yourself. Maybe your household. That depends on how you've worked things out with your spouse, just the degree of control you have there. But for a start, it's creating a problem where none actually needs to exist. This would be such a simple thing to clarify. I think it really does come down to context and who is speaking. Now, if someone is European and they are living in Europe where their family has lived, for 1,000 years, and they describe themselves as Norse pagan or Celtic pagan or whatever else, it could be safely taken to assume that they are referring to both ancestry and their religious persuasion. I think that's pretty clear. I think that's a pretty reasonable assumption to make. And if they came from a certain place and their ancestors were from some certain place, but they were worshiping different gods, that would be something, that would be specified later on down the road. However, if an American describes themselves as Norse pagan or Celtic pagan, that's not necessarily a declaration of ancestry. It's a declaration of what gods you have a relationship with. And you know who decides who gets to have a relationship with certain gods? The gods themselves. They're the ones who decide if they reciprocate. I mean, you can certainly honor any deity that you see fit to honor, but whether or not they choose to have dealings with you, that is entirely up to them. And that doesn't always occur throughout strict ethnic lines. And let's face it, in America, our ethnicity, our genetic backgrounds, it's a little more complicated than it is other places in the world, because very few of us have ancestors who have been here and only here for a period of 500 or 1,000 years. Pretty rare, that circumstance. And for another, people came here from all sorts of different backgrounds. They intermarried, they had children, and so now everyone's genetics is, it's pretty mixed. Even if it's not mixed as to race, it's certainly mixed as to national background. In my own case, we have the English, we have the Welsh, we have the Celts, we have the Norman French, and we have Prussian Germans and all this and that. That's a variety. Just because it hasn't created a different skin tone does not mean that it is not a variety. And also, let's not forget that the gods themselves are not, pure. Look at the Norse pantheon, for example. Odin is half giant, half Jotun, Odin himself. Thor is 3/4 giant, thanks to his mother Jord, who was full. Then you have the Vanir gods, who were an entirely different tribe. You have the Jotuns, again, a different tribe from the Aesir. They were all different tribes, and they intermarried and they made babies together. And some managed to knit themselves together okay-ish. The Aesir and the Vanir, they eventually did, after an exchange of hostages and a period of warfare, eventually they did come together. And it works the same way in human relations. Tribes form, tribes fall apart, people intermarry, and that's essentially what's happening in the United States. You also see this in Celtic form of mythology. You have the Tuatha De Dan. You also have the Fomorians and all these other different tribes. Lots of different gods, but nobody was pure. It didn't seem to affect society. That's all I'm saying. And that's why I think that, at least for us Americans, when we're talking about, what kind of pagans we are, I think it is perfectly acceptable to say that, if you worship the Norse gods, that you qualify as a Norse pagan. I think that's perfectly fine. And I think the people who are pitching conniption fits about it need to find bigger issues to concern themselves with, because they're making a fuss over nothing. They're confusing an issue that actually isn't confusing. And honestly, they're kind of infusing a bad atmosphere into something else. Paddy's Parlour, nationalism is not racism. If anything, it's the opposite. I agree, and I understand that, and that's not what I was implying. What I'm saying is that a preoccupation with race is probably problematic. Nationalism, I mean, that is a nation of people. And, and yes, with America, we are many peoples, all bunched up together. It'd be nice if, we were a little bit more cohesive. And perhaps if we get past our, our terrible twos, we will be. It's not the case today. But, one thing that really makes America different is that it is a nation that was founded on ideas, not essentially this tribe came to this land and we held this land. We became allies with this other tribe, and then we became one tribe together and we held this land. It's a different story. The other nations, they formed much more organically from that tribal structure, as opposed to America, which was deliberately constructed. Maybe we're looking at some issues with our foundation, but, we'll see if it can be fixed. We will see. Yeah, but kindly don't misinterpret what I'm saying, because I really am fed up with the preoccupation of color, especially in the United States, when you take a couple of DNA tests and you see that things oftentimes get a little bit more complicated. I mean, can you imagine if someone started doing DNA tests on different aristocratic families in European circles? That could lead to some very interesting results, especially if you got ancestral samples, because sometimes it was necessary for ladies to take steps to carry on the line. And sometimes the offspring wasn't strictly the offspring, but something had to be produced in order to carry on the title. I'm just saying, none of us should be over too preoccupied with purity. That's all. Now, last thing I really wanted to touch on was actually a video I watched yesterday. It was from the channel Dutch Pagans. And the gentleman was talking about why everyone needs mythology. And I thought he made a beautiful argument. And I really appreciated what he had to say. One of the things that he talked about was how human beings thrive on stories. We cannot exist without our stories. You're not going to find a people or a religion or even a political movement that does not have its own story. And that it's important to actually to choose the stories that mean something to you, that you believe in, and to make sure that they're founded on something that's actually worthwhile. I thought that was very good to bring up. One thing that I thought was good is that he brought up that if you don't choose your mythology, it will choose you. And he was really referencing people who are inclined towards atheism for this, because even though they don't have spiritual persuasions or anything religious particularly, that doesn't mean that they don't have ideology. They do, and oftentimes it's just whatever they're absorbing through osmosis. And right now, some of the ideologies, they are the hyper-racialized ideology. It's the climate, the climate cult. And hello to Violence is Life. Thank you for joining. Glad to have you here. And he focused a lot about how on the climate, the people, they're all obsessed about how we're all going to die. We're a plague on this planet. And he brought up about how, this is the story that they have chosen to believe. And it's just illustrates how dangerous that can really be, because it is anti-human. And it doesn't matter what scientific evidence you bring up or what kind of rational arguments, because it isn't about anything rational. And beliefs ultimately are not about the rational. They are about our search for truth and our search and our attempt to make some sense of the universe that we're living in. And so I think that's one of the reasons why so many discussions about essentially theological matters, even with this modern atheistic theology of, humans are bad. That's why so often those conversations just go, absolutely nowhere. It's because it isn't about reason. It isn't about proof. It isn't about historical accuracy. It isn't about scientific fact. It's about what people are choosing to believe and how those beliefs really reflect what they think of themselves. And thank you, Violence is Life. Glad she came in on time, checking in on her astrology. Thought to look over here. Huzzah, huzzah indeed. It's always nice to have more people here. And I think he's right. I think he's absolutely right when it comes to storytelling. Certainly, I think there's a difference when the stories were told as children, whether it's religious stories or other kinds of stories. It has a great deal of shaping of our characters and how we see the world. And then, of course, as adults, so many of us chose to go a different route. And the more we contemplate those stories, the more we go into it, the more we see different changes in our worldview. Violence is life. Human nature doesn't change. No, it does not. Our nature does not change, but oftentimes our ideas do. And I'm about to get into that. Katka, I missed like the first 15 minutes, but I've been listening. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I always appreciate a good listener. And Violence is Life. Stories are what link our generations to the previous generations. Oh, absolutely it is, which is why it's so detrimental that there are so many people out there that are trying to replace our old stories, especially since they're trying to replace it with the nasty Marxists and the climatologists kind of stories. That's just detrimental. I mean, and just inherently destructive. It's not going to be next generations if they really had their way. Because if you'll notice, all of these anti-human ideologies, they embrace any kind of ideology that means there's fewer of us, or that we're less prone to procreate. I think it's why they've embraced gender identity politics so much, these kind of atheistic and Marxist notions, because, one of the consequences of that kind of care is so many people who undergo the full process end up completely sterilized. Well, that means there's fewer humans on the planet, doesn't it? It's why I think there's such an encouragement of the victimization ideologies and cultures, is because such people are more likely to be depressed, and they are much more likely to remove themselves from the mortal coil, to put it that way. I think it's deliberately encouraged by some quarters. The people who can connect the dots and realize what these ideas means. It also accounts for the embrace of abortion, and also for the embrace of frivolous euthanasia. We're not talking about cancer patients who've been suffering agony and are just wanting some medication to help them ease out on their way. Canada is doing some rather shocking things when it comes to euthanasia. We've had people who've volunteered to be euthanized over mental illness. And of course, all of these Marxist ideologies, they're embracing all these ideas because it's ultimately anti-human. And so we have humans who are less of part of the picture. And of course, with all the climate change hysteria, that's one more ideology. You really shouldn't have children. You shouldn't make more humans, because humans are just parasites. And then, also their deal with, you shouldn't live as well as what you possibly could, and everything else. I mean, it's just, it's a nightmare, because it's all anti-human, but people believe it. They believe in self-destruction. It's really, really horrible. Cooperate. There we go. Absolutely. I watched the 2002 movie Reign of Fire, and through the survivors were in a castle filled with medieval art, the men putting on a play to entertain the children while reenacting Star Wars. I remember that movie. I like that movie. I've had a Christian Bale in it, if I recall. They did a good job with that. I mean, I enjoyed that. Let's see. It is anti-human. No wonder people call them lizards. Yeah, because they're so cold. It's such a calculating, cold nastiness. There's no hope in their ideology. And this is something that Dutch Pagans brought up. He's talking about how this kind of, I wouldn't even call it a rationalistic view of the world, because that isn't quite the right word. I don't think there's anything about it that's rational. But he said their ideas just absolutely take any sense of magic out of it. And that just isn't healthy. It just is not healthy at all. Now, one thing that I did disagree with him about was that he says that the main thing is to have a story that you believe in and to really embrace that story. And he said it didn't matter what it was. And he said, it could be, paganism, or it could be, Judaism or Christianity or Islam or all these other things. And that's why I thought, oh, I was right there with you. I was right there with you up until that point. But that's the point where my viewpoint and his does diverge. And I'm not saying anything against him, because if we lived in a sensible world, people could have these different beliefs, and it not really make a difference in how they treat each other. They could simply say, this is what I believe in, and this is what's helping me become a better person and productive member of society, and I don't need to force myself onto my neighbors. If we lived in a sensible society, I would agree with him that the main thing is that people are believing in something that connects them to the divine. But we don't live in a very sensible world, and I don't think I could really agree with ignoring the environment in which we live. I don't think that would be a good move at all. Because the truth is that ideas have consequences. And as I mentioned earlier, when you have ideologies that are essentially teaching my way or the highway, whether it's monotheistic religions or whether it's this nasty political Marxism, if there can be no real room for people to disagree, if there can be no room for people to say, I don't know about that, or that's all very fine. I can come together with you on some common human issues, but otherwise I'm going to go off and do my own thing. If there's no room for that, then we have problems, and we're experiencing problems right now. Let's see. Violence is Life says that Live and Let Live world turned 2020. Yes, it was. And, let's all raise our hands. How many of us missed that world? It was far less complicated. There were worrying things. And of course, the seeds for our insanity were planted then, for sure. But it hadn't quite gotten so bad. But I think we've got to come to grips with the idea that it does matter, because ideas do have consequences, because those ideas, they inform thoughts, and that turns into speech, and that turns into actions. And the next thing you know, either you're the kind of person who's going to be, leaving their neighbors alone and minding their own affairs, or you're going to turn into a crusader. And unfortunately, a lot of people are turning into crusaders. Violence of Life says, now we live in neo-feudalism, neo-puritanism, and the cultists believe in proselytizing. Oh, absolutely. They are the bastard children of the monotheists when it comes to the Church of the Woke. Now, the monotheists, they're returning to a really unhealthy way of being. I mean, and it's not going to be good. In fact, earlier today, I didn't watch it because I have a very difficult time sitting through some of the nonsensical discussions that Michael Knowles has with some of his guests. But he had on this exorcist, and the preview was talking about how he had met the devil twice, and this and that, and people who mess with the occult, they can't always handle it, and blah blah blah. And it just occurred to me, does it ever enter the minds of any of these monotheists that sometimes the spirits they're having a difficult time with, maybe they're not actually hostile towards them at first, and maybe just it is the human reaction to them that was a bit rude, and maybe that caused the problem? I mean, those of us who are pagan, I mean, if you have a house brownie or any member of the Fae, or just a house spirit in general, and you do things that disrespect it or that disregard it and don't nurture it, don't have a give and take, yeah, there's going to be a little bit of drama. But in a monotheistic worldview, if it's either, God or the devil, the angels or the demons, it's that black and white mentality of, if suddenly, oh, there's something spooky, I didn't like it. Well, maybe you didn't like it, but that doesn't mean that it's hostile towards you. Just because we're startled doesn't necessarily mean that there's a problem. It just means that we were startled. I mean, we cannot judge situations just by our initial reactions to them, particularly if it's emotional reactions, particularly if we just happen to be uncomfortable. That doesn't mean we ignore our instincts, but it does mean you conduct an investigation and discover what it is you are dealing with before rushing to conclusions. Because there are entities out there that are not friendly and are never going to be friendly, and they definitely don't like you. And then you do need to take a stand and get a hold of your household then. But uh, more often than not, it's misunderstandings, it's misinterpretation, and it's something that you could actually get along with, and someone, a spirit that might actually prove helpful in safeguarding the home if you were just kind to it. And I like what you're saying here, Violence is Life. The multi-phase beings told me that they were sad that humanity had forgotten the way. I don't doubt it. I don't doubt it. It is sad. I mean, think about how people have been cut off from something that is theirs by right of existence. This is one thing that a lot of different pagan religions actually do have in common, that there are things unseen that we can still have a relationship, and they just exist within nature, even if they're not detectable to our eyes, at least not all of the time. And to be cut off from that is being cut off from a part of ourselves, from our own human nature, and that is sad. And that's one of the reasons why I just cannot stand these conversations that Michael Knowles has with these people, because I mean, just from the lighting, the way their facial expressions, the dramatic music, you could tell it was going to be quite a whopper. And I would also like to point out that all of these scary, horrible things where paranormal activity just got out of control, how frequently does this occur in Christian households? How often does this occur in households where people didn't believe in anything in particular? But how often do you see this happen to Buddhists or Hindus or Native Americans or pagans? I don't really see too many of that. You could say, oh, well, these are minority religions in our society. So, of course, it's okay, we could have that argument. And granted, we would need to look at some facts and figures if anyone's been collecting those. But I'm just saying, as I find it less likely for these situations to get out of control when you have a non-monotheistic but still spiritual household. It's because you are open to the possibilities. You know that just because something went bump in the night, that might be the household guardian and not a household, what's-a-do who's there to open up your cabinet doors and bang on things when you would prefer to be sleeping. Let's see. It's like the Haitian poltergeist vids are spooky. I haven't seen any of those. I should probably look those up, but I mean, it really all depends on how you handle these things. I mean, if you go into it thinking that something is bad and all of your perceptions are colored that way and you just believe to the depths of your soul that of course it's going to be bad, then things are going to seem worse than what they really are. But if you have more of a cooperative spirit, and if you look at, this could be a spirit that is just here, it could be, a former occupant of the house, either their consciousness fully or yeah, an echo of them. But their energy is there. You can choose to work with it. You can choose to have a good relationship, or you can let things get out of control. Let's see. Violence is Life. I used to watch them a lot. Haitian people still do voodoo. Yeah, and I would imagine that it's, at least reputationally, it's still somewhat big in New Orleans. I don't know how many of them are the genuine article and how many of them are just making a show of it. I always kind of wonder about that when it comes to not just places where voodoo would be, but any kind of pagan outlet. How many people are the real deal and how many people are just doing it because they've seen a way to make a quick buck, or because they think it makes them edgy or cool, or because they think it's some kind of rebel thing. This is why every so often I deliver a really tedious sermon about how you should never make spiritual choices for the sake of rebellion or for the sake of attention seeking. That defeats the whole point of spirituality, and you're coming from it from a corrupted place. It should be about gaining connection, about seeking universal truth, about understanding your place in the universe. It should be about something higher than just, oh, this is so going to annoy my relatives, or oh, did you see the look on someone's face? I mean, we've got to grow up as a society, as an American society and as a pagan society. Let's see. It's cool at Marie Lavue's voodoo shop. I like it. I'll have to take your word for it. I haven't been there myself. I wouldn't mind at all investigating it, because, I mean, there does seem to be a difference in atmosphere between the shops that are there just to sell you an idea and that generally have more new agey stuff than anything that's genuinely pagan. And then you have the shops where there's actually something there, and you can just, there's a shift in the atmosphere. I don't know how else to describe it. It just, I mean, you can tell. You can just tell. And that's also why I think it's important for us to consider about how we do present ourselves in public, whether we're talking about shops or videos or whatever else. It's one of the ways I try to go out of my way to just present myself. I'm a normal person. I'm a housewife in the Midwest. I just happen to practice Wicca and Norse paganism. And I care about my country. I care about my religion. And I care about us having a world in which we can, kind of go about our business, do our things, and not really have to worry about so many of the self-destructive nonsense that people want us to worry about. It's losing my voice. Need some tea. And that, and I do advocate for that world, and I do get concerned because people plant enough thistles. Eventually, all those thistles are going to come up, and you have to go through all the stickers, and there's nothing else that you can do about it. I mean, consequences for actions are going to unfold regardless. And I do worry about what that means for us as pagans and as a people. Violence is Life says, the other day, my husband told me a story of a realtor who showed him $1 million house in the rich part of Chattanooga, and immediately sensed something was off. It turned out that her comment continues, the entire family that was previously there were all murdered, probably by the mafia. Ooh, that is dramatic. My goodness. I could imagine that there's more than a little angst of that house. And definitely in that situation, I could see that there could be some legitimate problems there, because for one, what if the family doesn't quite realize, their spirits that are lingering? What if they don't realize that they have actually crossed over to the other side? There are cases in which that occurs. And if they did, just the violence with which they were killed, the sadness of it, the fact that it took them all out, possibly by people who they might have been in fear of for a long time, or if they had once been on, decent terms with the mafia, and then things went sour for whatever reason, then they got taken out. There could be a sense of betrayal there on a more personal level. Whatever the situation is, I mean, obviously there's a need for healing there, and I would imagine probably for those spirits it would be better off for them if they were able to depart this realm and get on with the next. But then, even then, I mean, that is an opportunity for healing. And I'm not saying that it's going to be everyone's cup of tea to undergo the work that would do. But, I'm a witch. That's something that'd be like, well, better me than a normie. I would not have the same concerns. And also I have found that when it comes to dealing with the unseen, it helps to have a sense of sovereignty, to understand about who exactly is in charge around there. I have, even when I was a very, very new, barely out of diapers kind of witch, there were occasions in which I did need to send a certain kind of energy on its way. And I was successful because I knew whose turf was whose. I knew that I had things to do. It was being disruptive needlessly, and it was not responding to reason, and I knew who was in charge. And because I knew who was in charge, when I set the boundaries, those boundaries were maintained. Let's see. Follow up on that poor family. We aren't sure, but it's likely that the dad owed the mafia money. Yeah, never get a loan from the mafia. You live longer, and if you do, never witness nothing. That also helps you live longer. And just be careful about who you get into business dealings with, if at all possible. But speaking of the mafia, these days, it's really hard to tell the difference between their business model and that of the governments. They seem to operate on very much the same terms. But at least the mafia is honest about who they are, what they are, the nature of what they're doing. There are fewer illusions, whereas the government is like, we are the best people ever. And so we're going to do whatever we want. And if you oppose us, you're a bad person. Just, ugh, such a sick mindset. Violence is life. I used to make witch shrines in the woods behind my mom's house after Catholic church. Awesome. Good for you. I think it's incredible. I think we should have more shrines. I think we should start looking into having areas in which, they are a little bit more dedicated. There are certain spots in a local wooded park in my town where I live where there are signs that pagans have been there. And there's a different atmosphere. So I think at least some of them were actually the real deal. And whenever I go by, I always bring an offering just for any spirits in the woods and just to honor the place because it has been used as a temple, and so I respect it as such. Wiccan Conservative, we got Georgia in the house. Government is mafia. Yeah, I know. I swear, and the FBI and other organizations like that, they are the freaking enforcers. And then they can't figure out why nobody trusts them. Gee, I wonder. Violence is life. Yeah, the government is just mafia and control, something I've been saying for 2 decades. Yeah, I would agree. I think if anything, the fact that they seem to be more nakedly open about it, maybe that's ultimately a good thing. There's so many people who they just will not see a problem until it is just flat in their face. They're not going to see the tornado heading for the house until after it's already blown the house over. That's really what normies are like. So maybe all the acrimony in our society and all the things that are really out of order, maybe that'll be the one thing that shakes the normies out of their pathetic complacency. It is nice having an open air chat. And Georgia, I don't care if you're late. I don't care if anyone is late. I am delighted that anyone is here. It is thrilling that people take time out of their day to hear what they have to say, to have a chat with me. That is absolutely freaking awesome. That's one of the few things that I actually do appreciate about technology, is that it does make these things possible. Now, that being said, before we go, I do want to, because last week I had an unexpected analog day. There was an issue with the cable. My husband couldn't get it sorted out before he went to work. It did get sorted out that evening, but for a number of hours, I was internet free, and because I have all the technological ability of your average great grandmother, so I couldn't figure out how to turn my cell phone into a hotspot thingy or whatever else. So even my cell phone wasn't connecting to the internet because it was trying to connect to the Wi-Fi. That was my malfunctioning and all this other stuff. But I had a quiet day, and I cannot tell you how much I enjoyed it. It was so amazing. It was so quiet. If I wanted to listen to music, I had to get out a CD rather than turn on to YouTube. My laptop, you have to be signed on to, you have to be connected to the internet to really sign on to it, which I need to fix that, and I'm trying to figure out how, but the settings so far has eluded me. Again, great grandma level of proficiency with technology. But there was, if I wanted to write something down, I had to have pen and paper. It was just nice to have that kind of tactile day. Now, not to worry, It doesn't mean I'm running away from the internet or anything like that. Violence is Life says it's amazing the kind of conversations we can have nowadays. Oh, absolutely, it is. And honestly, that's one of the things that really gives me hope. That certainly over the long term, I think those of us who are sane and have brains in our heads, I think we can prevail. I absolutely do believe that. I do think that it's a multi generation task, but I do think there are things we can do to improve. And it's one of the nice thing about being pagan is that you do have a bit of that independent spirit of I need to follow my conscience. I need to be the person who's really looking at things and deciding what's right or wrong, because that's my responsibility as a human being. And just imagine, more and more voices encouraging that kind of mindset, whether it's about, taking care of your family or how you're dealing with your spouse or, your spirituality or your religion, just encouraging people to have more of that mindset of, it's up to you. You are in charge of you, and you are the one who needs to take the initiative. And, I know that's not easy for everyone, because some people have a very retiring, very quiet, very shared, you know, shy nature. And, and I'm not saying that you need to change your nature. And honestly, I don't believe you can change your nature. But certainly people can grow in confidence, and people can learn that that it's fine for them to make choices of their own, because that's the message that we're getting from everything else, that it's not fine to make your own choices, that you need to let all of these weird Marxist ideologies make choices for you. Well, that's not going well for anybody. And maybe the more people bump their heads against that particular wall, the better, just because they'll start saying, this isn't gonna go well. But regarding the analog life, I do think that it's going to be important for us to know when to take that time off, when to just get away. Because while it is important to follow the news, we definitely also need to decide, okay, when have I had enough news for the day? And then be able to walk away and honestly be able to just kind of relax, get a break from it. Uh, and there's something about that, about exercising greater control over how much information and energy is pouring into your household at any one time. I think it really is playing into how overstimulated we all are, all of our various gadgets and gizmos. See, Georgia says technology is such a double-edged sword. You have to realize it can be used improperly, but if we use it to our advantage, imagine how we are going to spread, all the time. I imagine that all the time. I do think that paganism is the way of the future. I really, really do. I think there's a reason why the gods have been awakening so much, and why so many people are suddenly discovering out of nowhere that they do have this ancestral connection. And while they're starting to have kind of the sense of uh, a familiarity with the gods, is because they are the progenitors of all of our various ancestors, and starting to realize that has value, it has meaning, and looking at their stories and getting the lessons from them and allowing it to make us better people. I think we do have a bright future, certainly in the long term. Let's see. Of course, they would say that they are totalitarian cultists. Well, yeah, I mean, and it's no joke. I mean, and if that's one thing that can really start to see its end in our age, it's this idea of my way or the highway, or my way of thinking or looking at something is the absolute only way. If we could put a dent in that kind of thinking, then that will have been a life well spent for sure. See, unplugging. Georgia tries to do that every weekend. Oh, yeah. Reference to the double-edged sword, much like actual double-edged swords. Boy, isn't that the truth? Isn't that the truth? And I swear our technology has already done more damage than literal swords have. Paddy's back with us. Most things are more magic conduit than we think. The internet is one of those things. Absolutely. And honestly, I think it would probably be a pretty prudent idea for us to start just whenever we do our weekly house cleanings, to also start doing some cleansings on the screens. Just, cutting energetic ties, putting up some shielding, just a little bit, maybe having some crystals nearby to our various devices, just to kind of give us a little bit of protection. Let's see. Also, Paddy, near zero effort to turn thought into radio waves. Very true. Very true. In Georgia, lots of people don't look at it that way. Yeah, but I wonder if that's going to change, particularly because finally science is starting to make some connections about magical principles that magical people have been kind of repeating throughout the ages. So I do wonder if we will start to see some acknowledgement. Now, not acknowledgement that anyone from a pagan or a magical background, thought of certain concepts first or observed certain things first. No, no, no. I don't think we'll see that. But I do think that science will find a way to give a logical explanation for this and such, while the rest of us are over there like, uh-huh. Uh-huh. Good of you to join the party. I'm glad you observed the blindingly obvious at last. How many test tubes was it required for you to acknowledge what your own eyes were telling you about certain things? I think we could at least see that. And if that is seen, that could also start to undermine some of the mentalities that have had a very world denying view. Let's see. It would be a hell of a scientific investigation. Yeah, it would. It would. But I mean, wouldn't that be time well spent? I mean, wouldn't we be better off if the scientists were looking into some of these concepts a lot more and trying to put them to the test and asking better questions and developing equipment to where you might actually start to detect some of this energy in a more meaningful, quantifiable way? That would certainly be more productive than what they've been doing for the past 2 years. And honestly, that entire discipline, they kind of need a win. I mean, especially after all the COVID hysteria and all of the various contradictory studies and people who are in the pay of certain organizations saying certain things. Uh, there's a loss of integrity. I think they have a real image issue, and it's all self-inflicted. It is all self-inflicted. All these institutions that complaining about how no one trusts them anymore. Well, you did it to yourselves. You absolutely did it to yourselves. And maybe if you act with some measure of honesty, integrity for the next 150 years, we might reevaluate whether or not they're considered to be reliable sources of information. Now, as for the news media, if you're in legacy media, you might as well kick yourself to the curb right now. I don't even look at legacy media anymore. The closest I get is I might listen to a Tucker Carlson monologue, but even that, I'm not looking at that to get news. I'm just listening to his thoughts on it. It's the same as any other commentary. And honestly, he's the only one at Fox News who I even pay attention to. And I mean, the rest of it, I mean, it's just really all the same to me. They're all pushing the establishment agenda, and the establishment, I mean, it has led us to the mess that we're in. I think it's time for a new generation. I think it's time for fresh blood. I think it's time for my generation, the younger Gen Xers and the older millennials, to say, you know what, we don't actually have to carry on with business as usual anymore. And honestly, I think that's what we need to do in paganism as well. Because I think we are past paganism being just this academic exercise, something that you research endlessly and that you're trying to get into. I think we have enough understanding of the basic principles. I think we've kind of come to general thoughts about what are important days and why. What's the general structure of how to conduct a ritual? Because I've been looking at different ritual structures for different forms of paganism, and I'm just saying there's more similarities than differences. I will say that. We've kind of coalesced to something that's kind of workable for us. From now, I really think it's all about that further step of integrating into our lives, not being ashamed of who we are, not being afraid, and honestly, of telling people who want to, label us and malign us, like, you're the one with the issue. You're the one who is condemning me, rather than actually taking a look at anything that I believe, let alone practice. And I really do believe that paganism is all about the practice. I did this whole, I'll believe it in my head, but not doing anything. No, that's not what paganism is. Part of that, I think, is a mindset. As I was in another conversation this morning, I think that is a mindset that was reflective of the lazy Christians who decided they could read their Bible at home and they didn't need to go to church. Well, okay. But how many of them actually read their Bibles? How many of them actually practiced anything they believed? And just, how many really? It's always all about what you do. And paganism is much more so, because when you look at, our cultural proverbs and a lot of the lore, when you get down to sayings, and when you look at what we know of how they structured their societies, what we can learn of their laws in the pre-Christian days, it was all about how you lived your life. It was all about what kind of person you are. It was all about, are you someone who's good at what you do? Do you aspire to excellence? Are you treating people properly? Are you performing your duty as a member of society? Are you building up your family relationships? Are you doing something more than just taking up space on this earth? So it was always about more than just belief. So I rambled on for an hour. I'm not sure how that happened. Thank you, everyone, for stopping in with me. Really appreciate it. I'm going to be kind of in and out of the server today. I'll be keeping an eye out. I'll be working on some outlines for future March videos that'll be up in the schedule. I mean, everything. I have video titles, so I have the theme. So, that's all sorted out. But just getting the outlines done so I don't ramble the way I do in these live streams. That's always very important. I like in my scheduled videos to be very clear, concise, because I know everyone's got lives to lead. But thank you so much for popping in on me. I will be around later. Look for live streams possibly on Thursday. We'll just have to see. But bye for now.